present three things today. Just some background to the project. Then secondly, how we define the units that we're using for the guidelines. And thirdly, just to give an idea of the sort of information that we're going to include in these guidelines. Okay, everyone attending this forum understands that Thicket has got this unique biodiversity, and also that there are all these threats and degrading processes happening in Thicket. So what we're trying to do is introduce systems where what's remaining can be managed in the best possible way, and so that we can ensure that it persists into the future and in an ecologically functional way. So SANBI has come up with all sorts of projects where they're looking at biodiversity management, and one of the projects is to develop these ecosystem guidelines. Currently there are two ecosystem guidelines out there. The one is for fynbos, and the other one is for grassland. And so the format for these guidelines is fairly well established. There's a nice template out there for us to use, and we're going to go forward and do these for other parts of the country. At the moment, our project team is working on the Albany Thicket Biome as well as on the Savanna Biome. But there's a plan to develop guidelines for all the biomes, and thereafter provincial guidelines. The time frames for the current project are from August last year to August this year. So you can see we're coming very close to the end of the process for at least coming up with a draft ecosystem guideline for the Thicket biome. All right. So the ecosystem guidelines need to provide a summary of the main ecosystems in the Thicket biome, and in terms of describing them ecologically, deciding what the drivers and the ecological conditions are at the moment, what the threats and pressures are, and then to provide recommendations on managing them. The aim is that they should be implementable, and they should be written in a style that is user-friendly, and that anyone, whether they're a specialist or a non-specialist, can use them. The process of developing these guidelines has involved stakeholders right from the beginning. So initially, we sent letters out to all of the key stakeholders, providing information on the project and inviting them to be involved in the project. We've had various workshops, and we produced maps of the ecosystems as we have them at the moment. We've had various stakeholder workshops which have been very successful. Some of you have been to the one we had in Port Elizabeth, and there have also been targeted engagements with various agencies. So this presentation I'm giving you today is also part of that engagement process, and if anyone would like to contribute anything to it at this stage, I will be around for the remainder of the forum, and you're welcome to come and speak to me. So one of the key things about developing the guidelines was deciding how many and what units to use. And at the time that we started, the revision of the VegMap Thicket biome hadn't happened yet. So we went through the same process that the Thicket guys have gone through, and hopefully we've arrived at the same end result. And of course, the guys that are involved in VegMap have been stakeholders on this project, and they've contributed immensely to how we've gone about defining these ecosystems. So if you look at the existing ecosystem guidelines, the Western Cape had 7 units, grassland had 5 units, and the Savanna ones that we're busy with at the moment as well has come up with 7 units. So we needed to peg it somewhere at that level, which the 122 units for STEP and the 44 units for VegMap, reducing that to 5 or 6 usable units was quite a challenge. So we had two products, the SANBI 2006 and the STEP classification. The original SANBI VegMap was difficult for us because it combined these structurally and floristically different units within one VegMap unit. So it was difficult to take ecological processes and assign them to each of those original 14 VegMap units. So STEP was a much better product for us to use, and we went back to that. The nice thing about STEP is it has this functional classification, and it's got this hierarchy. So there were the 4 main ecosystems, and then all of those mosaics. And then, of course, we have the review of the VegMap that came out, and we've taken the outcomes of that into account for these guidelines. Right, so the STEP thicket types, if you assign them to each of those 8 units that came out of the original functional classification of STEP, you can see that they spread quite nicely across those 8 units. And so you get the 4 solid thicket units at the top, then you've got these 5 mosaic units. 2 of them are fire-prone mosaics, and then 2 of them are fire-free mosaics, and then we've got this dune mosaic at the bottom. So in order to try and simplify the units that we were using, we could assign some of the mosaic units to the solid thicket units because functionally they had the same characteristics. So thicket forest mosaics fit in very nicely with mesic thickets. The ecological processes that are happening there are very similar. And similarly with thicket karoo mosaics, they fit in very nicely with arid thickets. The dune vegetation mosaics fit in nicely with dune thicket, and valley thicket could stay on its own. So we came up with these 6 units. Sorry, I'm just rushing through this. I know it's nearly tea time and we're all frozen. All right, so those are the 6 units we've settled on for the ecosystem guidelines. And as I said, we were looking for units that were ecologically and functionally consistent. So if we said this is a guideline, does it apply to everything in this unit? The answer had to be yes. So we've got dune thickets including mosaics, mesic thicket including mosaics, etc. up to number 6. In terms of any future changes to mapping products like VegMap, the units that I'm using here they're all conceptual units. So if there are any localized changes in boundaries or shifting of small units into other areas, then it doesn't affect the guidelines because conceptually they've been defined at this level. So those small changes won't affect the guidelines. Yeah. Okay, so this is just a zoom in on a part of the thicket biome where we've used this classification that I've imposed on the thicket based on STEP. You can see it's very complex. There's a lot going on there, but the 6 units that I defined, they work out quite well in the sense of mapping the units. All right, so for each of those units, in order to come up with guidelines, we had to ask a number of questions, and we put these questions out to the key stakeholders, and they've come back to us with various responses. But these are the key questions we're trying to answer for each unit. So, what the general characteristics are, the key ecological drivers, pressures and threats, recommended non-negotiables, spatial approaches for minimizing impacts and risks to these ecosystems, critical things for maintaining biodiversity, indicators, reversibility of impacts, and acceptable compensation measures. So there's a lot of stuff you can shove into those questions. At a local scale, if there's a landowner sitting on his farm and he wants to know exactly what to do in a particular situation, then hopefully those key questions will help him to answer those management questions. But what I want to just quickly do, and I can't go through all of the information we have, but I just want to throw up a map of each of the units and then an example of the sort of information we have for some of those questions that we have. So that's just that's the dune thicket of the biome. That's the distribution of it. And just as an example, this is the sort of information that would come out as a general description and the key ecological drivers for that particular unit. So for dune thickets, obviously coastal processes are an important aspect of defining those units ecologically. So it comes out as a key ecological driver. And the management of that unit then would depend on how you manage those processes. This information we have here would also exist for all of the other 5 units, but I'm not going to show you all of them now. Thanks. Next one. This is where the music thicket is, mostly or more towards the eastern side of the biome. And this is the sort of information that would come out under main pressures and threats for music thicket. Obviously, for the other 5 thicket types, you'd have different or similar information, but it could be along that line. So, for example, clearing of thicket for cultivation and urban industrial development is a key pressure and threat we identified for this specific unit. It obviously applies to some of the other units, but not necessarily all of them. Right, valley thickets, that's the distribution of it. It's the only one that doesn't have any mosaics in it. And these are the non-negotiables that we've identified for valley thicket. Once again, those non-negotiables are described for each of the other 5 units as well. So we want to avoid overgrazing, we want to avoid introduction of extra-limitable game species, etc., etc. So we've defined these sorts of things for each of the units. Arid thicket. I've just colored the solid and in the darker color, the lighter one. That's all of the arid thicket. And these are the best spatial approaches to avoid or minimize impacts as applied specifically to arid thicket. Once again, the other 5 units have got their own set of information for that. Right, this is thicket mosaics with grassland and savanna. This is the summer rainfall side of the biome, and mosaics in fire-prone ecosystems are different to mosaics in winter rainfall sides. These are some of the critical things to maintain for biodiversity to persist. So you can have a look at those. They are some are the same for the other units, some are different for the other units. And the last one is thicket mosaics with fynbos and renosterveld. This is on the winter rainfall side. Management obviously different. And these are some of the indicators to monitor ecosystem health. In this particular case, a lot of those indicators apply across all of the units, but there may be 1 or 2 that are specifically different for some of the other units. All right. The question we kept having to ask ourselves is who these guidelines are aimed at. The fynbos and grassland ecosystems specifically indicate that it's there for everybody. It's not just for scientists. Any layman or non-scientist, all scientists, managers, whoever needs to manage the landscape needs to be able to use these guidelines. And of course, management might mean different things to different people. So the idea is to have as many options as possible to address everybody's concerns and issues. And then the next thing is how specific and detailed the guidelines should be. Some people want us to give them exact stocking rates for a particular point in the biome, and we can't do that because it's just a guideline. So what we've done is we tell people to maintain stocking rates, and we refer them to resources where they can determine what those stocking rates should be. The way forward from here is we need to get a draft document to the scientific editor by the end of June, which is 18 days away. Then the document will go out to key stakeholders for a 30-day review period. So July, August 2018, we should get some responses from that. And then we'll update the documents and submit it to SANBI as a draft guideline, and they'll take it from there.